here, you're going to be unsettled. You're going to be made uncomfortable. And I think that's why you chose this place, I hope. Living life isn't just, you're not just a disembodied mind, right? So living life isn't just about thinking, right? It's about making choices. It's about choice of who you're going to marry and what kind of person you're going to be. And liberal education can help on all that too. It can help you make more intelligent judgments because it can help clarify what you really want in life. And it can also, I mean, as a byproduct, it's going to make you a much more powerful thinker and speaker and writer. That's not the end, but it's going to make you the kind of person that other people want to listen to.
Today, as I mentioned, you're going to hear from somebody who has, more than anyone I know, a deep love and knowledge of liberal education. And that's our Associate Provost, Loren Rotner. So you're really in for a treat. You have Strauss's essay, which I asked you to read beforehand, but you've got your own copy. So Loren is going to run us through what this essay means for us and his fantastic insights on Strauss.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And I'm very excited to introduce this, this great lecture, actually. It was not an essay. It was given as a lecture in 1959 at the University of Chicago, but it was very influential in my own undergraduate years, so I hope you live with it for these 4 years. I just want to start by addressing the question, okay, who is this guy, Leo Strauss? Why should you care about what he says? That's a question you should always ask when you're reading anything or reading anyone. And I'll tell you my opinion on this, but you should read his works and see what you think for yourself and judge him for yourself. But just to get the basics, he was a professor of political philosophy of really the first rank. And he taught at the University of Chicago from 1949 to 1969, had a massive impact there, had an endowed chair there. And like many of the premier intellectuals of his day from Germany, he fled the Nazis. And he came to America with people like Hannah Arendt, Walter Benjamin. There's a huge list of them. There's about 20, 30 of them. Mostly Jews, pretty much all entirely Jews. And they all fled the Nazis, and no one else would take them. America was the only place that would take them and host them. And so that's why liberal education, in a way, it's kind of dumb luck. That's why it has found a home in America, because of these people, because of these 30 people, and especially because of Strauss. What sets him apart is the scope and importance of his work. So at a time, the German influence on America was actually pretty great in the academy. That's where really it came from. The American university came from Germany. It was modeled on German universities. Professors in German universities tended to focus their lives on extremely narrow micro issues, or within a single author, or maybe at best they mastered like one author in the tradition of Western philosophy. But Strauss wrote groundbreaking studies on 24 authors. And his work spanned the entire Western tradition. He really was a master. He was fluent in 12 languages. So English was his third language, actually, which is hard to believe. So it's not too great an exaggeration that he almost single-handedly revived serious interest in liberal education and political philosophy in America. And Allen Bloom was actually one of his finest students. So Bloom studied with him at Chicago. So one last thing, and then we'll actually get into the text. UATX here, obviously, is very influential. A lot of professors here are students of his students. But every January, we run a program here. The program brings together top college students from across the country and top professors external to UATX. We study Strauss's works. So it's from January 2nd to 4th this year. And everybody here is eligible to apply to it. It's for college students, undergraduates primarily. So if you're interested in studying his works to a greater extent, it's not for credit. You're totally welcome to apply to the program. And the application is just available on our website. All the information is there. Okay, so turning to the text. The first paragraph. we begin with this phrase, liberal education, that Ben had mentioned. And it's a phrase we've been discussing all week, right? We've been delving into it. But what does it really mean? Okay, so liberal education means, above all, the effort to liberate oneself from the thoughtless dogmas and prejudices we are all born into, and that we carry around with us, often without even realizing it. And Strauss is going to try to give an account in this lecture of its basic features, liberal education's basic features. But notice how he begins. He doesn't simply praise liberal education, nor does he offer us total confidence in it. Instead, Strauss begins with a warning, not a counsel of despair, but a warning that is meant to provoke in us a certain kind of confidence, that if we recognize the dangers before us, we might be able to avert them. His focus then is going to be on an apparent danger to liberal education and how we should think about that danger. So that's the first paragraph. In paragraph 2, we turn to Strauss's first definition of liberal education as an education in culture. What do we mean by quote-unquote culture? We hear the word all the time. It's actually a pretty common word, and he chose it for that reason. It's used very casually, right? We hear it applied to Jews. Jews have a culture. Texans have a culture. There's a hip-hop culture. There's even street gangs. They have a culture, and Strauss, of course, references that in the text here. But what does Strauss mean by culture? He goes back to the root sense of culture as cultivation, as in agriculture. The acculturation of the mind so that it can grow to its natural heights. Culture in this sense is about improving the soil, creating the conditions under which the human mind can reach its full stature. So where does that improvement come from, according to Strauss? How does it happen? Strauss stresses the need for teachers. We are not born wise, according to Strauss, or fully capable or even aware of what culture is, or what its subjects are, what direction the plant should grow in, right? Or how high it can grow. But through slow, difficult work, we try to grow, to become more self-aware, and importantly, more at ease with our ignorance about very important matters. This isn't easy. We are all attached to our opinions, right? Many of you hold very, very strong opinions about very serious matters. And that's really quite good. We encourage that here. So, and I just want to point you out, like Bloom, when he references this on page 43 of Closing yesterday, he says that without strong opinions, we can't make progress in acculturating ourselves and growing our minds to their natural height. But how do we actually make progress? So Strauss points us in this direction. He says, first, it's by recognizing our need for teachers. Those who know more than we do and who have gone further in the quest for wisdom. That's the first step. But how do we know who the genuine teachers are? That requires ongoing familiarity with potential teachers, of testing and comparing them. And yet, how can students be wise enough to judge who truly teaches, of who can teach them? This is the problem Strauss sets himself to in this speech. Teachers here is a term of art. Strauss does not mean everyone we've had in grade school or high school, right? He means those who are wise and capable of teaching, who are in possession of the truth and no longer need further testing or study of what they think they know. For Strauss, teachers in this strict sense are the greatest minds. Yes, so here at UATX, there are amazing minds around us, and you've met some of them this morning. Ben Crocker, amazing mind. Your teachers here are very amazing minds, but the greatest minds, according to Strauss, are extremely rare. They rise above their times into a realm of universal human thought and questioning. They confront and master the deepest human questions and the fullest range of answers, engaging those who came before them at the highest level. Strauss says we are unlikely to meet any such minds in our classrooms except in books. So our task as teachers is to help you approach those books with the quote-unquote appropriate care. That's what he says. Well, what does that entail? What is the appropriate care? Strauss suggests we can only hope that the most experienced pupils, those yet not fully wise, assist the less experienced to approach the great minds properly, and through that encounter to grow beyond themselves, together. But the problem remains, how do we know who the best teachers are? That should be one of your governing questions throughout your education here. Who are the best teachers? The ones who reveal what you do not know and help you grow intellectually. And how can you spend as much time with them productively as possible? Okay, so I move to the third paragraph. In the third paragraph, Strauss goes right to the nub of the issue. He defines liberal education as an education in books. But think about it. There are a staggering number of books, a staggering number of commentaries, old, new, right? You could fill up a football stadium with them. And one could spend a lifetime going through them and trying to determine, well, which one should I actually study or read? So how do you even know which to read? Strauss sets aside for a moment this question for a moment to make a critical observation. The greatest minds do not tell us the same things about the most important themes. The community of the greatest minds is not united. It is marked by discord and by different kinds of discord. But notice, while they disagree about conclusions, according to Strauss, they are united in the questions and themes that they treat. They are working on the same themes, the same human problems, the same abiding concerns, even if they are refracted through different historical epochs or cultural standpoints. Okay, so what are those concerns? What are the universal concerns? Strauss doesn't simply list them. He expects you to wrestle with them for yourself. What is it that you really want to know? Why do you want to know it? Exposure to the books themselves will begin to reveal this to you. The books will give voice to questions you are already groping for but cannot yet fully articulate. They will unearth in your soul the longings you didn't know how to name. Okay, now liberal education, Strauss insists, cannot be indoctrination. Why not? Why can't it be indoctrination? Well, first, because indoctrination is opposite of what it means to be liberal. But second, and most decisively, because the great minds disagree. If the genuine teachers disagree with one another, then to indoctrinate students into any single one of their views would simply mean replacing one dogma with another. No matter how profound, a dogma is still a dogma. It's not liberal. Strauss takes a further step in this paragraph. He sharpens the problem. Liberal education is an education in culture. But again, what culture? Why Western culture? We do Western Civ here. We focus on Western culture. Why? Isn't that a dogma? An assumption of the superiority of our way versus that of, say, the Chinese or the Russians? That is what Strauss calls parochialism, the belief that our way is the best. And here I would invite you to recall Alan Bloom in Closing of the American Mind, which you've been reading. He argues that America is the one country where the claim that, quote, our way is the best, is itself tested and deepened by a radical openness to self-doubt, by a willingness to interrogate our own fundamental principles and opinions. America is the home of liberal education, Bloom suggests, because it is the most magnificent monument to reason itself. But how does Strauss frame it? He reminds us that culture is the product of any pattern of conduct common to any human group. If that is true, then every culture short of a lunatic asylum is a culture worthy of respect, worthy of study, worthy of serious consideration as educational. And this, in fact, is the mantra of most universities today, a mantra that we reject. Think of the course lists that you guys might have seen elsewhere. At UT Austin, you can study queer television. At Bowdoin, you can study queer gardens, which on their website is described as a survey of the horticultural achievements of gay and lesbian gardeners and a rereading of literary works on gardens from a queer perspective. At UChicago, you can study Marxism, anarchism, and the Black radical tradition. You can study rich craft and the cultural imagination, and the list goes on and on. Why don't we teach these things here? At our university, by contrast, courses are chosen with a different intention: to put before you the ladder by which you can ascend culture itself, to put before you the ladder by which you can acculturate your mind, so that it may grow towards its natural heights. In paragraph 4, Strauss defines liberal education as a literary education, an education in letters. At one point, he even subordinates liberal education, which he had originally presented as an end in itself, to another need, the need of our regime, a liberal democracy. Why does a liberal democracy need liberal education? Because democracy is a regime, according to Strauss, that stands or falls by virtue. Democracy means rule by the majority, of course, but it also presumes that the majority will select rulers for it who are capable of ruling for the common good. I'll reference 2 quotes from the Federalist Papers, which is the Bible of American politics. In Federalist number 55, James Madison wrote, quote, "As there is a degree of depravity in mankind, which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify a certain portion of esteem and confidence." Republican, or you might call, they use the word Republican and not Democratic, but Republican government presupposes the existence of these qualities in a higher degree than any other form. And here's another quote from Federalist number 57, so 2 Federalist Papers later. James Madison wrote, quote, "The aim of every political constitution is, or ought to be, first to attain for rulers men who possess most wisdom to discern and most virtue to pursue the common good of the society. And in the next place, to take the most effectual precautions for keeping them virtuous while they continue to hold their public trust." In other words, democracy is supposed to be a regime in which all, or at least most, adults are virtuous and wise. Or at the very least, a regime in which adults have developed their reason to such a degree that they can rule themselves without deferring to masters above them. Democracy in this sense was meant to be a universal aristocracy, a community in which human beings, by virtue of their rational capacity, could rise to rule themselves, both individually and collectively. The hope was that by putting education before every man, so before all of you, not restricting it to birth, connections, wealth, or religious authority, far more people than previously believed could become rational. But before the rise of liberal democracy, there was much doubt about whether this project could succeed. After all, we are not gods, says Strauss. We are both reason and passion. We want to know, yes, but we also want to be safe. We want to be loved. We want to be honored and respected. We want to have money. We want to have freedom. And we want to enjoy ourselves. So Strauss goes on and makes a sharper point. He doesn't linger on the ideal. He emphasizes instead that democracy, in fact, is ruled by elites. And it needs elites, men and women who, for whatever reason, rise to the top or have chance to rise. In other words, all of you. You're all would-be elites. Democracy depends on you. It depends on you to take care of politics, while most people are left to pursue the things of the body and of passion. Reading the sports page, as Strauss says, or the comic page, or the distractions of everyday life, right? Strauss even leaves open the possibility that this arrangement might work, that you might have elites who take care of politics, who concern themselves with highfalutin ideas, and people just, concerned with lower pleasures. The question is, why doesn't it work, according to Strauss? He says it doesn't work because mass culture is unsettled. So we're a mass democracy. It carries with it a disguised underbelly, a constant need for novelty, a fundamental dissatisfaction that lurks beneath the thin gruel of UT football or video games or chatter about Taylor Swift's latest outfit. And this is precisely what liberal education provides an antidote to, what nothing else can. Liberal education is the counterpoison to mass culture, as Strauss says, to its corroding effects, to its tendency to produce, as Strauss puts it, quote, in just a legendary phrase, specialists without spirit or vision and voluptuaries without heart. It is the latter by which we attempt to ascend from mass democracy to democracy as the founders originally intended it, a natural aristocracy, the ascension of the best in accord with their true potential for superiority. So I move to paragraph 5, where Strauss shows us that even the defenders of liberal education cannot be dogmatists. We have to take alternatives seriously that present themselves to us. But what are those alternatives? One of the key ones Strauss highlights is a return to nature, which maybe some of you might be familiar with. The hippies are all about it. In the 19th century, so the proto-hippies, the first hippies, they were known as romantics. I don't know if anybody in this audience has any familiarity with them. But they constituted an enormous movement in art, music, literature, and philosophy. So what were they about? What did they long for? They wanted to return to rustic simplicity, a time when human desires were fewer, passions were under control, and reason was still relatively undeveloped. Think of the simple pleasures of lying on a raft in the sun, not really thinking about anything at all. The sweet sentiment of simply existing, free from the hustle and bustle of the contemporary world. In this picture, people love their families, love their communities, and live contentedly in the simple pleasures of existence. Yes, their desires are few, ambitions aren't too great, but how important is ambition anyway? Maybe the road to happiness is not through culture or liberal education, but through the elimination of culture or liberal education. The most profound thinker of this alternative was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and we'll study him here. I'm actually going to be teaching a course on him in spring. If any of you are interested, feel free to sign up. But why, according to Strauss, is this not the solution? Might be a tempting solution for some of you. He says, first, we've already become too corrupted by the distractions and silliness of our world. To become uncorrupted, we cannot simply pretend that those influences don't exist or stop pulling at us. Though we can take away your phones for a time just to let you feel what it's like to live without them. We can do that. But it's still, I can tell, you're still longing for your phones, right? And besides, we ourselves are far removed from rustic simplicity. All of us are raised in towns and cities with phones and television. We are not and cannot be fully simple. Yes, purifying our souls requires us to distance ourselves from these influences, but that is only a necessary condition and not a sufficient condition for happiness. Second, Strauss says, we can't return to simplicity, to rustic simplicity, because illiterate societies were actually not all that simple. They were ruled by age-old ancestral customs that trace their origins back to gods or sons of gods. Those traditions were passed down orally, and when they were eventually written down, we cannot be sure the writings truly captured the authentic customs, the authentic wisdom from the gods and the origins. Strauss's point, then, is that there was never such a thing as pure simplicity. That is a myth. What is possible is something more modest, to get closer to nature, to something like a natural human experience, uncorrupted by the complexities of the modern world, as opposed to the layers of confusion and distance from nature that millennia of history have created in us. But the moment we have letters, the moment we have words, we are interpreting things. There is no direct, unfettered access to quote-unquote pure wisdom, according to Strauss. So what must we do, according to Strauss? We must live with books, or rather, or better, use books as a way to return to nature. Consider Socrates. Strauss brings up Socrates. He reminds us that Socrates profited quite a bit from books. As you guys all probably know, he didn't write books, Socrates. but he profited quite a bit from them. So how did he profit from them? How can you model yourselves on Socrates? Socrates didn't read silently and alone, as if the book itself were a sacred object and its wisdom could simply flow into his soul. No. Socrates engaged them actively. He questioned, he prodded, he wondered about what they meant, always with friends, always in conversation and in argument. And first of all, he tried to understand what the authors actually wrote on their own terms. He sought to understand the authors as they understood themselves. In moving to paragraph 6, Strauss asks, how does liberal education remind us of greatness or call us to greatness? His answer is through philosophy. So what is philosophy? Asked Strauss. Philosophy is the quest for wisdom, the quest for knowledge of the most important, the highest, the most comprehensive things. And such knowledge, Strauss says, is both virtue and happiness. Now, of course, this is a godlike standard, one that perhaps none of us will ever attain. Wisdom, Strauss insists, is inaccessible to man as man. So why don't we just give up? Because the pursuit itself matters. The pursuit allows us to achieve as much excellence and as much perfection as human beings can, up to the highest degree that is possible for each of us. But note this about what Strauss says. We should not be deceived by the many people out there who claim to be wise, who present themselves as wise. They are frauds, deceivers, with a clear interest in promoting the illusion of their own superiority. Strauss's standard of philosophy is extremely high, and it is the only genuine standard. It would be as absurd, he says, to expect professors of philosophy like me and like Ben and some of these other people around here you've met this morning to be philosophers in the high sense that Strauss expresses. It would be as absurd to think of that as it would be to expect professors of music to be Mozart's or professors of art to be Michelangelo's. We cannot be philosophers, says Strauss, but we can love philosophy. We can try to philosophize. And what does that mean? It means, above all, listening in on the conversation between the great philosophers, or more generally, between the greatest minds, and therefore studying the great books. But what about the greatest minds beyond the West? Strauss returns to this concern about parochialism, and he acknowledges it as a serious problem. Isn't it parochial, even dogmatic, to prefer Aristotle and Aquinas and Locke and so on to others that are outside the Western tradition? He calls this a problem of necessity. We are inescapably historical and cultural beings with a particular culture and a particular language. We cannot learn every language or fully master every tradition. Strauss tried to, but we can't. Strauss does hold out hope, though. He says that other civilizations, too, have produced great books. And he invites those who can to explore them at the highest level in the primary languages in which they were written. And a lot of his students went on, actually, to study the Chinese tradition very, very carefully. There's a further challenge, though. The greatest minds speak to us only in their writings. Aquinas doesn't exist now, right? And his writings are only monologues. They're not dialogues. They are not live conversations. So Strauss insists that we must create dialogues between them. First, we must understand them on their own terms. Then we must put them into conversation with each other. And this is hard. He raises the difficulty to its highest pitch. He says, quote, "Let us face this difficulty, a difficulty so great that it seems to condemn liberal education as an absurdity. Since the greatest minds contradict one another regarding the most important matters, they compel us to judge of their monologues. We cannot take on trust what any one of them says. On the other hand, we cannot but notice that we are not competent to be judges. Close quote. And yet Strauss warns there is even a greater difficulty. And it is not actually a delusion. Oh, it is actually a delusion, excuse me. We moderns tend to think we are more competent than the greatest minds. Why? Because we say they were limited by their own point of view or blinded by untutored prejudice. They didn't have access to the sweep of history or the thinkers who came later. We assume that intellectual history is progressive, that it develops, improves, gets smarter. We think, quote, we come later and of course we are wiser. After all, we are richer, we're more comfortable, we're freer, we're healthier, we live longer, we are more tolerant, we're less violent. Why aren't we also wiser? Strauss's challenge is that you must not take his word for it, but at least remain open to the possibility that the books you read contain wisdom greater than your own. That is the safer path, according to Strauss, because otherwise you would deprive yourself of the only access you may ever have to something truly alien, truly foreign, that could be worthy of greatness. In paragraph 7, Strauss emphasizes that there is no real comfort for us, except the comfort that comes from philosophy itself. But notice, Strauss does not want us to fall into despair. On the contrary, he wants us to embrace the enormity and even the difficulty of the task as I've outlined it. For Strauss, the world can only be redeemed in one way, insofar as it is the home of the human mind. That is what gives the world its dignity, and that dignity is most fully realized in our awareness that we can make progress in wisdom. Slowly, painstakingly, yes, often full of doubt about whether it constitutes true progress, but real progress is possible. We are graced with that potential. And that, Strauss suggests, is enough to give meaning and dignity to our lives. So to close, I simply want to read Strauss's final paragraph of this lecture. It's one of my favorite paragraphs that's ever been written, and I'm just going to read it right now. Liberal education, which consists in the constant intercourse with the greatest minds, is a training in the highest form of modesty, not to say of humility. It is at the same time a training in boldness. It demands from us the complete break with the noise, the rush, the thoughtlessness, the cheapness of the Vanity Fair of the intellectuals, as well as of their enemies. It demands from us the boldness implied in the resolve to regard the accepted views as mere opinions, or to regard the average opinions as extreme opinions, which are at least as likely to be wrong as the most strange or the least popular opinions. Liberal education is liberation from vulgarity. The Greeks had a beautiful word for vulgarity. They called it aporokelia, lack of experience in things beautiful. Liberal education supplies us with experience in things beautiful. Okay, so that's it. Happy to take questions about anything I've said.
There are people who are not people like anyone else, but the way it sounds makes me think that some dude making up a bunch of stuff, call himself wise, and become one of these great teachers. So what distinguishes this guy?
Yeah, he says there can't be an infinite regress, that there can't just be teachers of teachers of teachers of teachers. There has to be someone who made an original break to knowledge. In the lecture, he says that Socrates, the founder of philosophy, right, one of the founders, not the actual founder, but the founder of Western philosophy as we know it, he had teachers, right? He had books that he was reading. Now, there were obviously people who came before him who wrote those books, but they all had each other. So I think the emphasis I put on, just in response, is philosophy is a social enterprise, right? It doesn't occur in just a vacuum. Even people of the 17th century Enlightenment, some of whom spent all their time locked in a chamber writing a book, Montesquieu, Montaigne are both examples of this. They're both aristocrats and literally spent 25 years writing a book straight and did nothing else. They all, right, they had each other. And they were constantly trading letters back and forth and reading each other and responding to each other. So like, there's no view from nowhere, right? And we're all human, right? So we're all reacting to the common human experience that we have. There must eventually have been at least one primary pupil or a teacher who isn't a pupil, right? He says, but we don't really know who that is. And everybody else has always been responding to each other, or learning from each other, et cetera, because philosophy is a social enterprise. So, at one point, right, there had to have been someone who discovered, for instance, nature, the idea of nature. That had to have come from somewhere. It didn't come from nowhere. And Strauss is actually very interested in that question, how nature was actually discovered in the first place. I mean, I think the point is that philosophy is a social enterprise and people are learning from each other and responding to each other. And that's our duty, is to try to learn from and respond to the greatest human minds who came before us. Now, what constitutes their greatness? I think that's probably one of the things that you were asking about, or why are they wiser? They're wiser, according to Strauss, because they have a much more comprehensive view of the most important human matters that we as natural human beings all have to concern ourselves with. Now, as I put in my address, some of you have no idea what those are, right? I didn't when I was 17. But according to Strauss and his student Bloom, we're all groping in the direction of those questions or problems. I'll name a few of them. God. What is God? Does God exist? That's a problem that we're all interested in, that we're all searching for. What's the origin of the universe? What constitutes the best way of life for a human being? What is human happiness? What happens to us after we die? Is that the end, or is there an afterlife? What does God demand of us necessarily? I mean, all of these questions, right? Human beings have been thinking about these things for a very, very long time. And they're permanent, right? They're not going away. Because we might trick ourselves and think, oh, we've solved these questions, or we've advanced beyond them, and they're no longer relevant, or whatever. We have technology. It's awesome. And that's all, according to Strauss, false. That's all a phantom. It's all delusional. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Obviously, I went way beyond your question, but I hope that's useful. Do you have another follow-up, or is there another question? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Right. Translations are inadequate. Yeah. And so to really, really get down to what it is they thought, you not only have to know their language, but you kind of have to be of their culture fully. Because you have to be able to see things from the way they see them. And then the greatest human minds, according to him, ascend beyond that. Like, they're not just products of their culture. But to really get a sense of them, you have to kind of begin from their culture. And so because we're products, according to Strauss, of Greece and Jerusalem and Rome, we've been acculturated in the traditions sufficiently of the West to really try to get to the bottom of our culture. But there's still difficulties, right? Like, to really get to the bottom of Maimonides. There's a great mind. Strauss spent about 30 years studying Maimonides before he ever wrote anything on Maimonides. It's an extreme challenge if you're not seriously religious, right? And it's hard to adopt that frame of mind and really take those matters seriously if your soul hasn't been acculturated in that way. I know a lot of religious Christians feel that way about the Bible, right? Like, there's a real difference in reading the Bible as a religious Christian and really transformed by grace, and someone like me who is not a religious Christian, right? And a lot of religious Christians would say you just can't even bridge that gulf. Strauss, I think, would be a little more, I don't know, he thinks that there's a permanent human nature that ascends beyond mere culture. But he would say that there's an extreme challenge when it comes to, say, the Chinese or the Indians, in that you really have to get in their shoes, and it's very, very hard to do that. Bloom actually talks a lot about this in closing, because we tend to have the kind of false view that all you need to do is like at other colleges where you came from, all you need to do is go over to the Indian club or the Chinese club, and you kind of hang out with them a little bit, and maybe you take a course in Chinese art. great. Like, you can really begin to feel what it's like to be Chinese. Like, Strauss thinks that, and Bloom thinks that that's a ridiculous joke. And we're just lying to ourselves. We're actually just importing Western prejudice and putting it on alternative cultures, rather than really trying to see things through their eyes. A set of mores, you might say, that's an old-fashioned word, but a set of like opinions and way of life and way of seeing the world and a way of relating to the world, a way of being in the world, that is not simply, it's very hard to replicate if you haven't been raised in that world. And I mean, as a Jew, I think you probably have some sense of what that means. But any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so just on the Rousseau point, I'm a huge Rousseau fan, actually. And I'm going to be teaching Rousseau in the spring, and I invite all of you guys to take the course, because Rousseau is actually very interesting. And the way Strauss characterizes him, he doesn't actually mention him in the piece. That's kind of me saying that this is an expression of Rousseau. But there is a danger, I would say, that Rousseau has like kind of grafted onto our culture. And it's kind of romanticism in general. It's like, you know, you don't need book learning or education. Like, that's all kind of like, that'll kind of muddy your mind and make you overly skeptical and sophisticated. What you really need is to travel the world and to kind of have fun and experience the world and not worry so much and kind of just like be yourself, find yourself. That's all very Rousseau. Be sincere and authentic to yourself. That's all very Rousseau and romantic. The Strauss's view is that that's all a delusion, pretty much, because we're already too sophisticated. Like, we've already been shaped by a rational culture, and we've already been shaped by traditions and customs that push us in all sorts of directions. We have all of these opinions. We're just like bundles of opinions. And what the books help us do is they help us clarify all of that for ourselves. Like, what we really are and what we think about things, important matters. And that's the only way you're going to make progress. Because if you just kind of rest with a sort of dogmatic, silent, unconscious dogmatism about your opinions, then you're never actually going to make progress in the direction of what Strauss would call nature, or a natural understanding of the world, which is the true understanding. He uses the word nature, and I use the word nature in ways that maybe are a little confusing. And I'd love to talk to you more about that someday, but that's a huge can of worms. But what it basically just means is a kind of a more universal, true experience that is not modified or corrupted by our particular standpoint that we occupy here and now. All of you, I mean, you're raised in very different environments, you're raised with very different opinions, and you know, how do you sort through actually what, are you just taking things on faith, or how do you sort through what is actually good or true? That's your task before you in these next 4 years, is to do that. We're going to try to help you do it, but it's an enormous task, right? And that's what I think Strauss is really trying to, you know, get to, is how hard it is actually. Because I think there's a temptation that we all can feel that we've arrived there when we really haven't. There's just a massive gulf between where we are and where we could be, right? Anyway, so he really wants liberal education to be a counterpoison, he says, to a kind of smug superiority. The thought that, okay, we're later, the Greeks are dumb, they're simple-minded, they didn't have modern science, they didn't have iPhones, they don't really know anything about what it's like to be a human being today. He thinks that that is a huge problem. And you don't have to take that on faith. You can, of course, question that, whether that's true or not. But okay, so I had, let's see, it's Noah, or, I'm sorry, we're gonna all have problems with that. Noah or Nathan? Noah, okay, thank you. Well, that's a good, yeah, I mean, a very good question, actually. And I think it just raises the question of, you know, what is technology? And does it lead to greater happiness or not? It seems actually that the question is actually more ambiguous. I mean, it's more open than it might seem. I mean, like I said in the piece that I read, how could we possibly think that we haven't made progress, right? We're healthier, we have so much more leisure than our ancestors did, than the Romanian village does. Like, you guys have the leisure to actually sit here and listen to this rather than just working in a field all day and like breaking your back, right? That's a tremendous gift. And other people are paying for you to be here. So you're all aristocrats, right? Which is incredible, right? So how could we not say that we're in a massively superior position? But then you read Jonathan Haidt, you read all sorts of reports today. Depression is massively increased in the last 30 years. People are deeply unhappy. People are just aimless. They're spending hours and hours a day just scrolling a social media feed. I mean, is that a superior life to a life spent in a Romanian village without technology, or a life spent in a French chateau writing a book for 25 years? You know, I don't know. I mean, that's something that you'd have to really think about. Now, it's not like we have a choice. Like, it's not like you can live the life of the French aristocrat, or necessarily maybe the Romanian villager in the 12th century. I guess you were talking about a contemporary Romanian village. But maybe you do have that choice, but most of us don't have that choice. We have to live here and now, right? So, but it's still worth asking the question, because we can mold our lives in different ways, right? And I think I probably raised this in my own class earlier, but we have choices, right? We can decide to devote ourselves to God. We can decide to join the military. We can decide to be here at UATX. There's just a massive array of choices. How do you make those choices? Liberal education is the only thing that allows you to intelligently make those choices, according to Strauss. And that, of course, is a disputable proposition in and of itself, but that's the view, at least. Yeah.
You mentioned that it might be pretty tough to answer this question on the Romanian village or the
Yep,
US.
yep.
But because they're twins, I say we should send one.
As a natural experiment, yeah. Who wants to go? No, but let me respond for a second to that. You guys have all been without phones now for the last couple of days. Is it a superior condition? Maybe. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. There's some people here who I'm sure do not think it's superior, right? So that's a natural experiment we're running to kind of test a little bit of what you say. And here, wait, one more thing. Here, look, you're giving up things by going to this university. A lot of you could have gone to the University of Chicago or Yale and take those fantastic courses that I named in my lecture. A lot of you could have done that and had enormous resources and a huge sprawling campus and a football team and all this cool stuff, right? But you're giving that up to come here. And some of you are doing it for a lot of different reasons, but you're giving something up to come here. And the question is, what's the advantage in it? The advantage, I would like to assert, is in the fact that we have an actual educational vision here, that we're trying to give you the resources to become fully excellent human beings. And not all of you are going to get there, but we're going to do everything we damn well can to try to help you get there. So, okay. And your name is James? Seth. Oh, I'm sorry, Seth. What is the liberal student? Sorry. Yeah. Right. It's not history, it's counseling stuff, right? Yeah. It's a good question. And it's a good challenge, especially, I'm sure it's on a lot of your minds. Like, what is all this liberal education stuff at Joe Lonsdale's university, the guy who built Palantir and stuff. And you're all ambitious, right? You want to go out and found tech companies maybe and be famous. Some of you want to do that maybe. So what is all this liberal education stuff about? Well, the business of life is living. It's not simply just making money. Money has to be a means to something else, which is living. And what liberal education can do is it can help you live the most excellent and highest human life possible. It's an end in itself. There's nothing beyond it. Because what do we all want? We want to know important things. We don't want to know trivial things. That's not going to satisfy us. We want to get to the bottom of some of these questions that I had mentioned to Nathan, right? And some of us think we already have the answers, but here you're going to be unsettled. You're going to be made uncomfortable. And I think that's why you chose this place, I hope. So does that make sense? So, we're also going to help you develop, okay, living life isn't just, you're not just a disembodied mind, right? So living life isn't just about thinking, right? It's about making choices. It's about choice of who you're going to marry and what kind of person you're going to be, right? And liberal education can help on all that too, is my sincere belief. But the proof is in the pudding, right? So you're going to have to see whether that's true. It can help you make more intelligent judgments because it can help clarify what you really want in life. And it can also, as a byproduct, it's going to make you a much more powerful thinker and speaker and writer. That's not the end, but it's going to make you the kind of person that other people want to listen to and hear from. So that's my sincere belief. But again, the proof is in the pudding.